I can later. Come see me. Okay. So, good morning, everybody. I'm Strom Carlson. Welcome to LayerOne. This presentation is called Hacking FedEx Kinkos, How Not to Implement Stored Value Card Systems. Just before we get started, how many of you know what I'm going to talk about? How many of you saw the little video that I sent out? Cool. How many of you don't know what the hell I'm going to talk about at all? Glad you're paying attention, Screw. And how many of you actually work for either FedEx or N-Track and came here? And aren't too chicken to raise your hand? Okay, well. So, as you know, how many of you have been to a FedEx Kinkos recently at all? Okay, so why don't we do this? Let's get into the theory, and I'll get into all the details later. So, what is a smart card? Well, a smart card is a small plastic card, roughly the size of a credit card. It typically carries a microchip, and smart cards aren't just limited to cards with contact pads. You can have cards with contact pads, cards with just little antennas inside, so you can, just pass them over readers. You can wave your wallet over a reader, for example, as you get on the subway, and it'll deduct the proper fare. Or you can have a combination of both. I've seen cards where you wave it over the reader to deduct fare, and you plug it into a machine to actually add fare. And this is an example. This is a small little typical smart card right here. Now, the fact that they're called smart cards just means that they're a little more intelligent than magstripe cards. And those are your credit cards where you swipe them and you're familiar with them because they die after a while. They're almost smarter than script kiddies. So there's two varieties of smart cards. There's the microprocessor-based cards, which there's the really fancy ones. You find them on credit cards. They've got a microprocessor, some RAM, some flash ROM. They are often optimized for cryptographic functions. And, like, for example, if the SIM card in your GSM phone, the way that works is that authenticates you to the network by a challenge response. The phone network sends you a challenge, and then your SIM card, because it has that microprocessor and knows what to do with that code, will compute a response based on the code and then send the response back to the phone network. And if the phone network determines, the phone network has already computed its own version of the response, and if the two match, then it knows that you're the right chip, and you've correctly processed the code, and so therefore you are this chip we sent out, and you're authenticated onto the network. Also, the cards, like the American Express credit card that has the smart chip in it, that's also a microprocessor-based card. There's memory. There's cards with simple EEPROMs, sometimes with a microcontroller, and they can sometimes perform basic security functions like write protect, or sometimes really simple cryptography. And they tend to be cheaper than the microprocessor cards. And you find them more in situations where, like, the card is free, or it's a low-value application, or they're not expected to last a long time. So one specific variety of smart card is the SLE4442. It's a very simple, very cheap chip. It's got a 256-byte EEPROM. The first 32 bytes of the chip are irrevocably write protectable. You can write a header to them. You can write, basically there's a header, there's manufacturer code, there's a code which identifies the specific application of the card, and then you can write protect those permanently so that those can never be changed again for the life of the card. You can read the entire 256 bytes of the card at any time. Just stick it into a reader, and you can read all the data off. There is no protection from reading. There is nothing there that's secret. There's nothing that you can't read. Well, actually, there is, but I'll get into that shortly. You can only write to the card after you have present a specific 3-byte code to the microcontroller. And the code varies from application to application. But typically what happens is when you purchase these cards from the manufacturer, you specify, okay, I want the code to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And they'll pre-program all the cards with those code. And so when you're done, when you get the cards, they all have that code and you write to them. And the code is supposed to be known only to you. It's a secret, so no one else can find it out. And so presumably, if nobody else has this code, then no one can write to your cards and alter your wonderful, valuable data. And there is a protection against people, tinkering with these things. The card does become completely unwritable after you present the incorrect code 3 times. So if you get a stack of 5.6 million cards and have a lot of free time, and you can brute force the cards, but that would take an extraordinarily long time. But it's possible, theoretically. So I took one apart, actually, and that's the chip on a dime. A tiny little thing. So you can see how these are suited to actually be in smart card applications because they are pretty tiny. So why would you want to use this chip if it's not so great a chip as far as security goes? Well, it's really, really cheap. In quantities of 200,000 at smartcardworld.com, I found them online for 36 cents each. And I'm sure that if you're buying more, or if you go to some manufacturers who don't have websites, or if you go to the manufacturer directly instead of a reseller, you could buy them even cheaper, 20, 15 cents each. The security function does prevent the casual attacker from altering data. So, someone who's just going to look at it and just has one card, who isn't really determined to alter everything, but just has a reader and is going to poke around, isn't going to be able to just go, oh, hey, let me change this to this. So it prevents the casual attacker from screwing around with your data. And the chip tends to be more durable and secure than a magstripe card. I mean, the magstripe is readable at any time, it's writable at any time, and the magstripes wear out. So, I mean, these you can throw in the washing machine, you can actually pass a magnet over it. They tend to stand up to a lot of abuse. So they're kind of designed to be used as replacement for magstripe cards. Now, there is a common application of this really cheap, really inexpensive card that I'm sure you've all used at some point. They're used by this little tiny random Xerox shop that you've never heard of in your entire life called Kinko's. And this is a Kinko's card right here. When you go to Kinko's, the way these work is you go up to a kiosk and you press a button and it spits one of these cards at you for free. Then you take the card and you stick it back in the reader and you put value on it, $1 to $5, and then you go and you take it to the Xerox machines and you make your copies, or you go use the computers that debits the value from the cards. So it's called Express Pay is the name of their system, and this showed up. They started showing up in around 2001. Before this, they had this really cheap, crappy magstripe system, which was apparently very easy to make copies of the cards. So they decided, well, let's do something a little more secure. So you can refill the cards, you can use them any number of times, and it turns out actually that the system was developed by this company in Toronto called N-Track Technologies, and so FedEx didn't develop it internally, and so N-Track sold them this wonderful system, and they said, oh yes, it's wonderfully secure, these cards are write protected, blah, 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 but we'll get into that later. So the questions I had using this, I was making copies at a Kinko's one time, and the questions I had were, is there any personally identifiable data stored on the card? I mean, theoretically, these cards could just have a single integer on them which says $17.37, and there could be no tracking, nothing at all. But there could be more. There's 256 bytes. There's a lot of space to store all sorts of weird, random data that you wouldn't expect. Is there a transaction history stored on the card itself? Once you go make your copies and use the computer and everything, you can go back to the kiosk and say, print me a receipt. You stick your card in, and it'll say, oh, okay, here's what you did. You made 15 black and white copies, and you used the computer for 3 minutes. And it'll offer to print you a receipt on paper. So seeing as there are 256 bytes, you could theoretically code a transaction history onto the card and have that be what's used for printing the receipts. And how secure is the data that's stored on the card? The card itself offers no built-in cryptographic function, and the data could theoretically be encrypted before you store it on the card, but somehow I didn't think they would go to all that trouble. It's just too much trouble, Why would you want to encrypt all this data? It's just serial numbers and stored values and all that good stuff. No one would want to read that, right? Is the value even stored on the card itself? These could theoretically just be serial numbers on a chip that have the impression of being this fancy schmancy smart card system, but really all they are, they're just serial tokens that you go in, you stick it in the reader, and it pulls the value associated with that card off the network. And what else is stored on the card? There is a whole lot of storage space to store whatever data. Who knows, right? So it turns out one of the problems, actually, that I discovered in doing this research is that this type of stuff isn't that well documented. There's lots of little bits here and there, and there's general overviews of smart card technology. But there's two problems. First of all, there's no really good comprehensive volume available. Like you go to the bookstore, you can get everything you ever wanted to know about TCP/IP or SS7. But you can't go to the bookstore and find everything you ever wanted to know about smart cards terribly easily. So the other problem is that all the literature that you can find searching around for smart cards tend to focus on the microprocessor cards because those are fairly standardized. There's a whole set of ISO standards that the cards conform to. And so pretty much all the microprocessor cards, depending on which microprocessor card it is, will still conform to enough standards to where you can write a general volume on microprocessor cards and pretty much have one volume that covers them all. Whereas these cards actually don't conform to all the standards. They do conform to the first three standards, which are physical characteristics, the dimensions and the locations of the contact points on the card, and the electrical characteristics and class indication for integrated circuit cards operating at the following voltages. So pretty much just specifies the physical characteristics of the card and the electrical characteristics of the card, but nothing else. The card doesn't conform to any of the ISO 7816-4 and above standards. And the 7816-4 standard specifies things like the contents of the card, the retrieval of data, data structures, and so on and so forth. And you can read them all here. Access methods, security architecture, methods for secure messaging. None of this stuff actually applies to this card. So it's a proprietary protocol, but it conforms to physical standards. And one of the problems that you discover is that the readers which are available, some of them can only read the cards which conform to the 7816-4 standard and above. How many of you, when American Express was giving out the free readers a while back, how many of you got like a whole ton of them? Just screw? What? So, yeah, well, I know I got a whole bunch of them, and so it turns out that those are only good for reading the microprocessor cards. You can't read these cards in the American Express readers. And so you have to go find a reader that can read the card. And there are some readers which actually state they can read ISO 76, all the ISO cards, plus, the following memory cards. And it turns out there are a bunch of memory cards, each one with their own proprietary standard. So this is the ACR30U. It's this little USB reader that works under Windows and Linux. It reads this card, and it costs about $30 on smartcardsupply.com. So that was fairly easy. Go online, order it, free shipping. There it is next day. So I got a whole bunch of cards, and I got a whole stack of cards, actually, and I decided to pick through them, and I visually grepped them and saw what changed and what stayed the same from card to card. So this is a dump of a FedEx Kinko's card. Here's all the data that's stored on this little tiny microchip. 256 bytes, not that difficult. And so looking at the data and correlating it with what happens at the store, you do things like you go and you buy 2 cards in sequence and you see what happens. So you go and you buy a card and you dump the data, then you spend 10 cents and you see what changes. And so looking at a whole bunch of different cards, I came up with this. So the first 32 bytes are the header file for the card. This remains the same across all the FedEx Kinko's cards. When you go and you buy the generic SLE4442s online, if you buy just a small quantity of these at smartcardsupply.com, they're like $2 each. But if you buy a larger quantity, you can get them for like 70 cents, 60 cents, so on and so forth. So this remains the same across all the Kinko's cards. And actually, it turns out I was playing with one of the first blank ones that I bought, and I said, well, I wonder what happens if I go and I just stick this in the reader at FedEx Kinko's. Well, it turns out it turned it into a Kinko's card, and I couldn't. So there was $2 wasted, and I could no longer rewrite the header. So then the dollar value is stored here in the next 8 bytes. And so using 8 bytes to store a single dollar value seems a little ridiculous, but I'll get into how this is stored later. There's a timestamp for the date and the time the card was first issued. Actually, I think that this byte here is also part of the timestamp, but I've seen instances where this gets changed to just zeros, and the timestamp still seems to stay the same. Since this was developed only in 2001 and onwards, they wouldn't seem to be concerned about 4-digit years anymore, because this company's kind of stupid, it turns out. So it would make sense that it only starts with 05. But this timestamp itself is, September 21st, 2005, about 4:05 in the afternoon is when this card was first issued. There's a serial number that's stored on the card, and actually when you go to print the receipt at FedEx Kinko's, the serial number from the card is printed on the receipt. So this is fairly easy to correlate. And it turns out that the first 4 digits of the serial number are the store number where the card was issued. This is 1163. I think that's in West Los Angeles somewhere. I can't remember. And then the cards just increment as you go along. So each time a new card is issued, it gets a number which is one more than the previous card. And this is stored in decimal-coded ASCII. I forget what the exact name is of this, but there's another timestamp, which, as far as I can tell, for every card that's issued at a machine is exactly the same as this timestamp. But I did one card where I went to the counter and I said, "Hey, can you give me a $2 card?" And so she grabbed a card and she took my $2 and she manually made the card. And that timestamp was actually, I think, the 2 timestamp looked like when she started issuing the card and then when she finished typing in all the data. So there was like a 20, 30-second difference between the 2. But other than that, I can't find any significance. Did you have a question, Galt? Okay. And then there's more, actually, which I didn't highlight here. Like, for example, this is ASCII, which says cash customer, just plain old ASCII. And then I'm not sure what this is. This is just more, decimal-coded ASCII. And I'm not sure what that's for. I think it's just a marker to identify this as an express pay card. Because it turns out that when you, like I tried certain things, like I tried altering a whole bunch of these values. And if you alter these values specifically, the card just goes blank. And it issues a brand new card on the same chip. So the stored dollar value is kind of interesting because everything else is pretty dumb and easy to understand just by looking at it. But this didn't make any sense. I'm looking at these values and they're very confusing. They're using 8 bytes to store the data. And these don't seem to correlate at all to, what's going on. Like, obviously it's signed. So you've got like, these are all $1, they're 3F, and then BF is, this is the same. The 4 cents is the same as -4 cents, but the sign changes. But everything else is the same. And then once you get beyond like, $2, these change, and here are all 6s. But there's $20. But it doesn't make any sense just looking at it. And so I went round and round and round, and I talked to people, and they had no clue. And then after about 2 months, I got the bright idea to just take one of these and stick it in Google. And so it turns out it's just IEEE 754, double precision floating point values. And which is really amusing because the maximum value you can store in one of these is 100,000 centillion dollars. This is 100,000 centillion dollars. Just to give you an idea. I'm sorry? Yeah, totally ready for inflation. Maybe that's why they chose it. But just to give you an idea of how big this number is, if you take a Google and cube it, and then you multiply it by, I think, 10 million or something like that, you get this number. And there's not a Google of subatomic particles in the known universe. But now you can have a card with more dollars on it than there are subatomic particles in the known universe. So, I mean, solve the national debt with Kinko's. Yeah. Small change, please. Small, unmarked, non-sequential bills, right? So if you want this quickly, that's 1E308 to the -1. So let's get into the security code, which is at this point now that I've figured out the way the dollar values are stored, this is the only thing that's standing in my way of playing with these things. So it turns out that the card is protected by a 3-byte security code that's only 24 bits. There are 16.7 million possible combinations. And based on my research before I figured out how to do this, I decided that all the Kinko's cards probably had the same code. Because the blank cards, if you just take a card out of the kiosk that's blank, unused, no scratches whatsoever, looks like it came fresh from the factory, don't ever stick it in the kiosk and just take it home and try and diddle with it with your card reader. It doesn't have the default security code that the blank ones you buy from smartcardsupply.com do. They have a security code so it's not the default, and so I would assume that it's the code that they've secretly decided on with the manufacturer and only Kinko's knows. So And deriving the code from changeable data on the card might cause the card to become inoperable if the changeable data somehow becomes corrupted. And that would be kind of a bad thing for Kinko's because, you've got a customer, what did I do? There we go. You got a customer who gets like a $20 card, makes $5 worth of copies, puts the card in their wallet, goes home for 2 weeks, somehow damages the card, a bit of data gets twiddled somehow, it gets flipped. And now, because the security code has to be derived from that important bit of data, the card no longer works, and the machine says, sorry, your card's invalid. And there's nothing that because obviously the employees aren't going to be able to do forensics on the smart cards unless you're hiring really well-paid Kinko's employees, which I don't think is going to happen anytime soon. So the customer's crap out of luck, the customer's pissed off, the customer never wants to go to Kinko's again, and that's a bad thing from a business perspective. So, yeah. And everything else about the card is so ridiculously simple and so thought up by a 2-year-old anyway that it doesn't make sense as they go to all this trouble to protect the data. So how do you attack this? This is a diagram that I derived from the datasheet for the SLE4442. And actually, if you go to smartcardsupply.com and you click on SLE4442, they have the datasheet for the card freely downloadable. So it shows the protocols, data structures, everything. There's actually, this card has become discontinued, and there's a new version of the card called the 4452, or it's the 5542, I can't remember. Anyway, all that's changed is the contact pad has changed a bit. The chip is now got like a layer of metal on it instead of being in an epoxy bubble. And the data sheet for the chip is now no longer freely available, but the old one is. So the security code can only be read once the correct code has been written to the card. So there's actually, some fairly simple logic. So if you're going to actually write, you have to go through the security logic and the protection memory. The protection memory basically is just 32 bits. Each bit specifies whether or not one of the bytes of the protectable memory is write protected. So these bits are pretty much turn on only. So once you turn it on, you can't turn it off. And that's not that important. But every time you write to the card, you have to go through the security logic. And so unless you've presented the correct security code to the card during that session, the security logic won't let you actually write data to the card. You'll think you're writing data, but the actual memory won't change. So you've got to get the code somehow. You can't pull it off the card directly. So there's 4 possible attacks that I thought up. One would be a social engineering attack. One would be emulating the card itself. One would be somehow intercept the code during transmission. And one would be read the memory off the card directly. So the social engineering attack, as I basically decided it would work, would be to contact NTRAC and extract the code from some unsuspecting employee. So you pretend to be some field engineer or someone in another department. You say, hey, I'm working on this for Kinko's, and I need the code. Could you please tell it to me or send it to me or email it to me or something? So, seeing as they're so wonderfully security-minded, I'm sure they would go to great steps to protect this information. And the good thing is it requires no technical jiggery-pokery of any kind. You just call up, you get the code, and there it is. But the problem is that the code might be so secret that no one but NTRAC engineers even know about it. And maybe the engineers are battling with management. Management wants something simple and quick, and the engineers are saying, no, security, but management won't let them. So you never know. And if they change the code, it's going to be kind of suspicious if you start asking for the code every time they change it. And it's not really a technical challenge, it's just a social one. So it's only good a couple times and doesn't really have any long-term solution, and it doesn't really prove that the card is vulnerable. There's an emulation attack, which I thought would be really slick, but I didn't have the code foo or the know-how to do this. One option is to use an emulator that you plug into a laptop, and you can actually get these. They look like smart cards, but they got this big dongle off the back and a cable that runs into a laptop. And you use these for testing out applications and generating prototype cards without actually having to go through real cards. And so, this is the way people develop smart cards. This would be kind of foolproof. But the problem is the dongle at the end of the emulator is kind of bulky. And the way the transport mechanism for these cards work is you go to Kinko's and you stick the card in the reader. And the reader has this motorized transport, which pulls the card about, depending on which reader you're putting it into, either about 1/2 inch to 2 inches into the reader. And so something big that's hanging off the back of the card isn't really going to be that useful as far as that goes, because it'll get stuck and it'll jam, and the reader it'll never get to the contact, so you're screwed. And since this card is so simple, I mean, there's emulation software for the really advanced microprocessor cards, but these are really simple memory chip cards, and I wasn't able to determine easily whether or not there was emulator software available for it, so it might not exist at all. The other really cool idea I had, which I want to do, but I just didn't have the time or the know-how to do it, was to find a microprocessor-based smart card or a PIC or something that you can make behave just like this chip. So, you know, you get your generic card, and you program it, and you go and you stick it in the reader and at the Kinko's, and the Kinko's thinks, oh, this is one of my cards, and you do a transaction with it, and you go home and you take your card and you just read the code off the covert location in the memory that the card reader stuck it in, the card itself stuck it in. And this would be really good because, if I hadn't dropped it on the floor, this is the blank SLE4442 card that I got from smartcardsupply.com. This is the card I got from a laundromat. So, I mean, you can tell they're kind of very similar looking. And if someone hassles you about it, which I really doubt they will, but if someone does hassle you about putting this non-Kinko's card into the reader, you could say, oh, stupid me, that's my laundromat card. I wasn't thinking. Let me pull out my real card and use that one instead. So, and it's really elegant attack because any system that uses this type of chip is vulnerable because of this attack. I mean, you just take it and stick it in any reader, and it pretends to be an SLE4442. You copy the data off a known card, and there you go. And the problem with this is every microprocessor card I've seen seems to follow all the 7816 specs, not the 4442 specs. So that was kind of an impediment, and I didn't really have much time to go traipsing around and coding around looking for it. The third option is to intercept the security code somehow. And so the idea I had was to take the card's contacts, wire them to a logic analyzer, go to Kinko's, you know, with the logic analyzer, and do a transaction, capture the transaction data, and go and analyze it. And this seemed fairly easy because you can get small USB logic analyzer about $300 to $400. The wires can be easily hidden. You know, you just take the card and run a wire up your sleeve or something, and you got the laptop in your backpack. So no one would ever know the difference. You're just some kid with a backpack, right? And the problem is that also, since you're using a real SLE4442, there's no chance or little chance of the card being rejected because it didn't look like a real card, because it is a real card. The only problem is, if you're not that good with a soldering iron, these chips are kind of difficult to solder things onto the contact pads, and you can destroy many a card by not soldering right. You know, you'll warp the card, or you'll burn out the chip, or you'll make it unusable.
You might get stuck in the machine too, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. If you wire it wrong, it'll get stuck, and then you've got to run and leave your fingerprints everywhere. So that's no good. And the other option is to burn the epoxy off the chip and read the security memory directly. And you could do this, and it's good because none of the tedious mucking about with transactional data. But the problem is that it's really expensive unless you know someone with the ability and the equipment and the scanning electron microscope and everything to read directly off the silicon die. So let's attack this, right? Let's stop talking theory and have some fun. So I decided to do the logic analyzer attack. So I soldered my wires to a stored value card, attached a logic analyzer, and went off to Kinko's. And you can see I've got wonderful soldering skills. I got the solder everywhere. But I mean, this is exactly what I did. I've got little pieces of transformer wire that you wrap around coils to make the electromagnets, and just burn the insulation off the edges, solder it to the cards, and make this really primitive ribbon cable out of electrical tape. And then take a pin header I bought at Fry's and use that. And the way my logic analyzer works is it has little pin headers to stick onto these little pins to stick onto these pin headers. And so I go and I do my attack, and I come back and I get all these bits. I'm like, well, that's useful. A sea of bits. So what I had to do, of course, is there are certain commands that you have to look for. And actually the way this works, if you look, there's 5 pins. There's a reset pin, there's a voltage pin, there's ground, there's I/O, and there's clock. So there's only actually one pin that you really need to pay attention to. You need to look at the reset to see when it resets the chip and know that, okay, that's the start of a transaction. The others aren't so important as far as the data goes, so it's only a single line serial data. So it's pretty easy to do. There's actually And so this pin is a non-connect, and the ISO 7816 spec, before I get asked this, actually specifies 8 pins on the card, and if you look at like my laundromat card, it has 8 pins. But since 2 of the pins are no connect anyway, and this pin's also a no connect, but these 2 down here are no connects. And so to save money and make it a cheaper card, they just don't put those pins on the card. Saves money on gold and contacts and manufacturing and everything. So we get all this binary data that dumps out of the logic analyzer. And so there are these commands. Then if you look in the white paper for the card, it tells you all these commands. It's a very simple command set. It's a very simple chip. You read main memory, update the main memory, read the protection memory, write the protection memory, read security memory, write security memory, and compare verification data. So each command, it's a very simple structure. There's a command byte, there's an address byte, and there's a data byte. And then, so whatever goes on, that's how the card interfaces with the reader. So you start picking through the data. Oh, and so what you want to look for is this specific protocol for presenting the security code to the card. You read the security memory, you update the security memory, and you do 3 compare verification data steps. Each time you do a compare verification data command, then a number byte indicating which byte of the security code follows, 1, 2, or 3, and then 1 byte of the security code. Then you update the security memory again, then you read security memory again, and if that all goes correctly, and if you presented the correct code, then the card will let you write to the chip. So this is from the very start of the transaction. There's an answer to reset, and this is the first 4 bytes off the header of the card. Then there's a processing cycle, and then, hey, here's read main memory. Start at byte 15 and read to the end of the memory. So there's a processing cycle. Then here comes all these bytes that we saw earlier. The header, the value on the card, the timestamp, the serial number, and so forth. And this is just going through. And because of these processing cycles, which you don't know how many bits they're going to take, you can't just write something to split it into evenly 8 bits and figure out, okay, here's where it's going. You have to manually step through each bit, or each byte, and say, oh, hey, this is where this one ends and this is where this one begins. So thousands of very, very boring bytes later, we find this. Read security memory, update security memory, and then there's a processing cycle. Compare verification data. 1, here's a byte. Compare verification data. 2, here's a byte. Compare verification data. 3, here's a byte. Update security memory, blah, blah, blah. Read security. Why am I still doing that? And I was going to put them on the cards, but then I thought better of it, so it's all X's. And if you read here, it says, I'm the information security responsibility cupcake. And it's my job to tell you that you're going to have to find out the code all for yourself. Also, dead hookers.
Boobies.
Boobies, yes. Oh, and just for screw, 50% more cat sex.
Yes.
This is going to be the best Easter ever.
So, now that we know the security code, we can manipulate the card. And I was going to just do this picture because I didn't want to give you guys a security code. But then I remembered, oh yeah, I've got this blank card with a default code, so I can show you how it works. So, let me pull up this. So this is the application that actually comes from the manufacturer of the smart card reader. So you take your chip, you stick it in there, pull up the memory card tab. Can you all read this? Okay, so you look, Siemens, here's SLE4442. You pull that down, and so we can read the main memory here. And so it starts reading the chip, does a reset and everything. And so there's the memory. And so this is really easy. All you need to do is take the key. And so let's pretend, just for the sake of an argument, that we're going to enter the wrong code. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 or something. It's like, oops, wrong code. Now you only have 2 chances to input the correct code. So the default code on these is all Fs. Put that in. And it's like, hey, now it's back to 3, because if you put the correct code in, then it resets the error counter. So now that we've put in the correct code, we can update the card. And this is actually buggy. It should say, hey, you've entered the correct code, but it says, incorrect, now you've got 3 chances. Incorrect, now you've got 3 chances. Incorrect, now you've got 3 chances. So, but it will still let you write to the card, because the card's smart and the application's dumb. So now we write to the card, and we can do something like, I don't know, Dead Beef Cafe. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever. 2, 3, 6, 8. Then, hey, there it is. So now we were able to write our data to the card. And that's actually what's on the card. And if you do a read, it canceled, didn't I? I'm smart. So it reads the data off. So there's the card, and that's how you do it. And so now that we can play with the value, I should note that the maximum value you can put on a card at the kiosk is $100. So I took this wonderful photo, and this proves that we can now write to the card. So we went public with this actually at the end of February, and we did a whole security disclosure, and we posted this photo, and everyone said, "No, this photo's a fake. That's not possible." So we made a video of us hacking the cards and posted it up all over the internet and got like 75,000 downloads or something. It was actually kind of amusing because we put this up, and Kinko said, "No, based on what we know about these cards, you're not supposed to be able to do this. You can't do this. This is just a hoax, blah, 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 blah." And so we posted the video, and they said, and then they backtracked a bit. They're like, okay, maybe not. Maybe you can. And so my guess as to what happened was because Kinko's had never developed this, it was all N-Track that developed it, N-Track sold it to Kinko's and said, "Hey, this is totally secure. Don't worry about it." And so Kinko's believed it was totally secure. And so now they're probably screaming at each other, pointing fingers and saying, "Hey, blah, blah, blah." So now that we know how to modify the cards, we can now play with the back-end system and see what we can do with it. Have some fun. I'm just sad 9x isn't here because he got a kick out of the slide. So if you've ever been into a Kinko's, this is a typical diagram of what a Kinko's looks like. You've got one kiosk, you've got a bunch of tills, you've got some PCs, like maybe a Mac, some copiers, and so on.
Where are the suicidal employees?
They're all off in the back smoking, having coffee, getting high on stuff. I don't know.
Where's the dead hooker?
The dead hooker is hidden inside the copier. There's different varieties, depending on your taste in dead hookers. Color, yeah. Color, black and white, whatever. So, so the first thing that I tried was let's just try card cloning and see if the system, because the questions I had were, does the system actually keep track of the cards, or does it kind of just implicitly trust whatever's stored on the card? I mean, doing the implicit trust of everything that's stored on the card would be really dumb, but it's not completely unexpected. So the first question is, does the system reconcile the balance on the system, on the network, with the balance on the card? So what you do is you buy a $1 card, you clone it, you make a Xerox or two with the original card, and then you try and go and print a receipt from the kiosk with the cloned card that still has $1 on it, and see what happens. And so I did this, and the receipt said, you made 2 copies at 10 cents each, so therefore you spent 20 cents, and your balance is now $1. So it turns out that when you do a balance inquiry and print up a receipt, it does the transaction history based on the serial number, and then it prints the balance based on what's stored on the card. So the second question, does the system do anything if the card balance suddenly increases? Maybe that's designed so that if the copier didn't somehow debit the card, it wouldn't raise any alarms. It's possible. So you buy a $1 card, you rewrite the card to $2, you make several Xeroxes, of course less than $1 worth because you don't want to commit fraud, and you print a receipt at the kiosk. And so I did this, and I did the same thing where I made a Xerox and said, oh, okay, you bought a $1 card, and you made one 10-cent copy, and your balance is now $1.90. So the second one, weird serial numbers. Does the system freak out if it encounters a serial number from some non-existent store? Because the first 4 digits are a store number, then theoretically there should only be cards from stores that exist. Like there's no 9968. There is no such store as 9968. There's no such store as 7715 or whatever. So, and even if there was, I've never encountered a card with serial number 7654321. So, this should theoretically never happen in real life. you're never going to encounter a card with that. But you buy a $1 card, you alter the serial number, you make a Xerox and see what happens. And it works. You make a Xerox and you print the receipt and it says, your card serial number is 9968765431. You made a copy. Your balance is 90 cents. Have a good day. It doesn't care where your card comes from. It only uses the serial number, it seems, to track the number of copies you make. So you can also, it turns out, cash these cards in. You can go and you can say, oh, hey, I'm done using the card, and I put 20 bucks on it, but it turns out I only need to make 15 bucks worth of copies. Can I get my $5 back? And the employee will go, yeah, sure, here you go. Here's your $5 back. They'll, of course, read the card and see what's stored on the card, but they'll give you back your money. So the question is, if you invalidate the card, if you cash in the card, does it become invalidated, or can you still use that card? Because they insist on keeping the card after they cash it out for some reason. So what you do is you buy a $1 card and you destroy it. All these tests are designed to specifically avoid actually committing fraud, and that's kind of the whole point. You want to do this kind of security research without committing fraud so you don't wind up in federal pound-me-in-the-ass prison. So you buy a $1 card. I know you guys wouldn't like to be there, but you buy... You buy a $1 card and you destroy it. Then you buy a second $1 card and you make a Xerox with that $1 card. Then you clone the card, and you go and you take your original card and you say to your fellow happy Kinko's, helpful Kinko's employee, you say, hey, I want my 90 cents back. So they look at it and they give you your 90 cents back, and you go, you walk away. And you walk back to the kiosk, or you walk back to the copier, stick in your cloned card, and try and make a Xerox with it and see what happens. And you print a receipt. And it turns out this works just fine. You take the clone card, you can make more Xeroxes with it. And the receipt printer doesn't say anything. It's like, hey, yeah, here's your card, here's your copies, here's your balance, have a good day. And so I thought, well, okay, maybe it takes some time for the card to be invalidated. So I went off, I ate some pizza, I came back like 30, 45 minutes later, and I tried it again. The card still worked. So I decided, okay, maybe it'll take like a whole day or maybe like a whole week to invalidate the card. So I went back 6 days later and I tried using my clone card again, and it still worked. So it turns out that there is no security whatsoever with these cards. The only thing that they do is they trust that no one can write the cards because no one has their secret code. And if you can write to the cards, you can do anything at Kinko's with these cards. You can make 10 cards that have $100 each on them, and no one would ever know. Did I mention that this company that develops has only this product? And their slogan is counterintelligence. Yeah. I'm sorry?
Just a description of their employees.
Is it? Yeah. It's on their website. You go counterintelligence, N-Track Technologies. So... I wish I was making this up. I seriously do. But I'm not. So how do you engineer a better system? If you're going to implement a stored value card system, how are you going to do it so it's not this piece of shit? Well, first off, there are two options. Replacing all the cards might be expensive. These are cheap cards. And you've designed the system around the concept of the fact that the cards are cheap. The cards are free, and to the customer, and you don't really care if people take them away because you're making profit on the copies and whatever. So you might want to keep these chips. And also it's a big hassle if you've got all these cards in circulation to phase them out and replace them with a new type of chip. So if you're going to keep the chip, you're going to want to change the way values are stored, first off. You're going to want to change the way the security code works. And you're going to want to change the method for verifying the cards, because just the fact that, it has the right security code and it has the right header isn't verification at all. It's very easy to copy these cards, and it's very easy to pretend to be something you're not. The problem with doing this is it's kind of insecure. So how do we do this? First off, you can do things with hashes. You can generate a hash based on the serial number, the value, and timestamp, and verify that against a hash stored on the server. So you have a list of serial numbers and a list of hashes stored against them. And you only store a hash once you generate a card with that serial number. So this protects against things like fake serial numbers or taking an existing card and altering the data because, now that you've verified it against the hash, if it doesn't match the hash, then hey, the card's been screwed with somehow, and you're out of luck. You could store a second hash on the card based on the same data to verify that the card itself hasn't been altered. I mean, you could have one hash and then something which appears to be completely unrelated to the data on the card, and so that way if someone just diddles with your plain text value, then you've still verified it against the hash, and oh, wait a second, that's changed. Shouldn't allow this card. You don't want to store anything in plain text on the cards either. I mean, this was ridiculously easy for me, a phone freak who doesn't hack computers, to reverse engineer. And if you encrypt the data somehow, or if you hash it or something, and make it just look like random data and not appear to be anything that makes sense just by looking at it on a screen, then it's more difficult to reverse engineer it. You can not store value on the card itself at all. You can just have serialized tokens and pull the value from the network. And you can store a hash on the card to verify that the value on the network hasn't been altered. The only problem with this, of course, is if you get a card and you can read the serial number and you change the serial number, well, all of a sudden you don't have your $1 card. You have Bob's $100 card that he bought before you. And also you can invalidate the cards when they're cashed out. Duh. That would be a smart step. And you cannot, one good idea would be don't use the same security code for every single card in circulation. Did I mention that the security code that I discovered is the same for every single Kinko's card out there? So how many of you have Kinko's cards on you? One? Wow, I was expecting more people to bring them to the talk. I'm sorry?
We own printers.
But yeah, any card that you've got, I could rewrite. So you can use the code derived from some randomized rotating value stored on the network, which, and and this would work because you know that as you do transactions with the card, this code's going to change, and you keep a record of that changing code. So even if someone takes a logic analyzer and discovers the code, it's no good, because every time you use the card changes. And don't base the code on any value stored on the card itself, because that would just be dumb. You say, oh, this card is $20. The code is $74. Oh, this card is $15. The value is therefore $71. Yeah.
The code without the difficulties of a customer either bought a card a month ago and tried to use it, or bought it at another store. You have to keep those in sync to every store.
Well, see, the interesting thing is that you can also stick credit cards into these readers. So there is likely some sort of connection to a network. And all these stores have internet connections. All these stores can, I'm sure, and actually, when you look at the data brochure for the system from NTRAC, one of the things that they try to sell you on is the fact that you can audit the data afterwards. So you can audit the data and you can, see transaction history and see how much money's gone in, how much money has gone out, so on and so forth. So it would make sense that these could all be connected together. So it wouldn't be that much of a problem to cache things locally for cards that are generated at the store and then upload them periodically, or just have a store, if it has a card it's never seen before, say, oh, hey, I don't know where this card is. This is store 75. Let me query store 75. Hey, store 75, have you seen this card? Oh, yeah, here's the data. Here you go. So it wouldn't be that difficult. I mean, this is the age of the interweb, so why not? You could use a different chip. You could use a cryptographic secure memory chip. The Atmel crypto memory chip that's used on my laundromat card is more secure than the Kinko's card, and this is just for laundry, not for Xeroxes. This actually has cryptographic functions built in. It's not a full-on microprocessor card, but it's a hell of a lot better than the SLE4442. You could use a chip with a microprocessor. You could do challenge response authorization, encryption of data, access control, hidden goatsy, whatever, and so on. And if you're concerned that the new chips are going to be too expensive to give them away for free, well, you charge a deposit. Currently the cards are free for the taking. More secure cards are too expensive. We can't implement that. Well, my laundromat charged me $2 for this card. I'm not losing this card anytime soon. I'm going to hang on to it with my life. And, I'm sorry? For $2, yeah. Well, I mean, it's an expensive piece of plastic. Right. And then you could always get over the fear of charging people deposits by refunding the deposit if you give the card back. And it'll help prevent curious takers like myself from obtaining massive numbers of cards for play and analysis, like this. I destroyed a lot of these while I was playing with code, so I don't have quite this huge a stack anymore. But so that's pretty much it so far. Resources: securescience.net, my company. My website, stromcarlson.com. Infineon is the company that manufactures the chips used on the Kinko's cards. Atmel is the company that makes the crypto memory chips. And smartcardsupply.com is where I bought all my stuff. So, Q&A?
So what's happened since they admitted that there's a problem?
Absolutely nothing.
Sweet.
One problem, you said when you clone the card, you don't need the security code for that, do you?
The question is, when you clone the card, do you need the security code? You don't need the security code to read the data off the card, but to write the data to a second card, you need that code.
To a blank card?
Well, the problem is that even if you have a card, I actually tried this with one of my blank cards. Remember the one that I said that became a FedEx Kinko's card? What I did was I took it with the default code and then put all the data such that it looked like a Kinko's card, except the security code was wrong. And it turns out that every time you put a card into the reader, regardless of whether you're going to alter the data on the card, it tries to write to the card to verify that it's a real card, and if it doesn't have the right security code, it just rejects the card.
What is that security code?
The security code is, I'm not telling you.
It's more than 3 bytes.
What would be the implications if somebody published the security code?
The question is, what would be the implications if somebody published the security code? Well,
Bad karma.
yeah, bad karma first off, but pretty much as soon as the security code gets out, any kid with $30 and a credit card, or someone who knows who knows someone with a credit card, can get one of these readers and alter the cards to their heart's content. So if the security code gets out, and this is why I'm not giving anybody the code, if the security code gets out, then you've got problems with people running around, altering data, causing Kinko's massive headaches and massive amounts of frauds. And I want to demonstrate that this is possible, but I want to give them time to change their system so they don't have any major problems.
Plus they'll come after you.
Yeah, plus they might come after me. So
They haven't given you any shit so far.
nothing. I mean, like, they haven't even talked to me directly. We sent them a security advisory at, like, the beginning of February. We gave them plenty of time to respond to us. They didn't say a thing, so we went public with it. And then they just spoke through PR statements. They never contacted us directly.
Well, at present, the thing is, until that security code gets out, it's cheaper for them to not talk about it and not make it a big deal because it'll cost them a lot more to re-implement their nationwide system.
That's true. That's true.
So until some kid like maybe sells $100 cars for $5 on his college campus, they're not going to be losing much money.
Yeah, what Data said was basically until that code gets out, it's cheaper for them to just pretend it doesn't exist and not make a big deal of it because it would be more expensive to alter everything than it would be to just go ahead and assume no one's going to alter it. Screw.
Okay, bit of a loaded question. Can you store a negative dollar value on the cards?
Okay, yes, actually. It turns out you can. There was a slide with negative dollar values, and in normal use, you run into this. Like, you'll have 8 cents on a chip, and you'll make a 10-cent copy, so you end up with negative 2 cents. And they allow you to do this just to be nice. But it turns out that since you can store values above and beyond $100, you can do things like store negative $100 on a card. You can store negative $500 on a card. We actually tried this. We did a negative $100 card and put it in the reader and added $1 and it went to negative $99. And I also tried doing some silly things. I tried doing $1 trillion on a chip, and it turns out it didn't like the $1 trillion chip. It just said, "There's a problem with your card. Please see an employee." But I think I was able to get it to I forget, what did we, $15,000 or something? Was I put $100,000 on a chip or something, and it just rewrote it to 15,000. Any more questions?
Did you make it clear to them that once the code gets out, it's not like the impediment to entry is not a $300 logic analyzer, it's only a $30 reader?
Yes, I made that very clear.
So you would think that if they didn't want to re-architect the whole system, they could keep the same crappy system, just implement strict back-end accounting and shut down cards like insecure Visa cards were?
Yeah, they could do that. I mean, they could literally just rewrite the software, and keep all the same cards in circulation. If you see an old card for a time being, maybe what you do is, if you see an old card, print up new cards that are a different color or something and say to customers, you only have another month to use these cards, and then at that point, these cards aren't going to work anymore. And so you have a transition period where any old card gets traded in for a new card, and then, after that month, you're all set. And so you've got the same chips, you've got the same manufacturer, just printing them different colors, and you're fine. But, they don't even seem to want to be able to do that. Any more questions?
What's the maximum you can pull out in cash?
It seems like we're closest to like $5 or something like that to at least mitigate some of that.
I forget what the specific store policies are. The maximum you can put on a card is $100. I've never tried cashing out more than maybe $5 or $10 at a time. Although I assume, because in California these are treated the same way that gift cards are, so by law you have to be able to cash them out for their full value. So in California, at least, you could cash them out for $100. Other states, I don't know.
So if you put $15,000 on there, do you think they cash you out?
If you put $15,000 on the card, they'd look at you kind of askance, I think.
Wouldn't the $15,000 cards that you've created make a really good setting credit card stuff?
Possibly.
You need 15,000 in copies.
That might work, yeah.
The $100 limit that you mentioned, is that a hard limit set in software, or is that simply set by FedEx policy? I don't let the guy behind the cash register put more than $100 on the card.
Well, at the kiosk, you can't actually, the kiosk will not accept any more money once you hit $100.
Okay, so I guess what I'm asking is, if you had a card with, let's say, $99 on it, you put it in, and you threw another 100 in, would it credit it to $199?
I think actually, it maxes out at 100, but it'll actually say maximum value at $99 to a point I haven't checked at which point it says maximum value reached. I would assume maybe between $80 and $95.
Okay, so I guess what I'm asking is, it won't let you go over the $100 limit at the kiosk.
It won't let you go much over $100. I mean, the kiosk is designed so that you can't put more than $100 on the card, theoretically. I don't know about the cash registers, but the employees all seem to claim $100 is the maximum, so I don't think they would since they know that, they wouldn't put $200 on a card for you. Okay. Any more questions? Galt?
Could you comment a little bit about the legal implications and how you would go about doing research such as this? So that
Well, I did cover that in the slideshow. It's kind of beyond the scope of the Q&A. But basically, the whole gist of it is make sure that if you're going to dink with cards, make sure that you put $1 on it and then increase the value and spend no more than $1 on that card. Or if you're going to clone a card and cash it out, make sure you get a second card and destroy it. So you've put money into the system that you're not going to be able to take out again. Or you're not going to take out again. And that way, you're not committing fraud. I'm sorry? Keep what? Oh, yes, document it all very well. Print receipts, everything. Harry?
How often does the client require the security code? And can you keep a session live after it got its security port?
Well, I mean, this one, for example, it's been in the reader, it's been on this whole time. It's a simple chip. It doesn't have a timeout mechanism or anything, so this is still writable. The second I take it out, you can no longer write to the card until you represent the security code. Theoretically, maybe. I don't know.
The barrier to doing this would be less.
Might be worth playing with, yeah.
It does do reset when you start the session. So.
Yeah, there's a reset when you start the session, so.
But does it reset when it ends?
I don't know. We'll have to play with that at some point. Yeah. I'm sorry?
Does FedEx know about the security code?
Oh, yeah, we sent this to them, I'm sorry? I assume FedEx has it, yes. We haven't actually sent them the code per se, because that would be kind of dumb to transmit it over the network, but, yeah, they know they're in business with the company, they can contact NTRAC and get the code, so there's no need for us to give it to them.
How do you know they just haven't changed the code?
Because the cards still work. Any other questions? All right, I'm intruding into break time, so thanks, everybody.